let's get into this and let's talk about the SEC preview for the night. So I wanted to start off, we'll just start off something simple and we'll go, why don't we go the team, we'll go alphabetical for each side. I'm going to start with Houston, and we're going to go the team that Clemson normally has faced or has faced multiple times in the national championship game. We'll go with the team that Dabo Swinney originally played for when he was in college, and that is Alabama. So Houston, as you look and did your research onto Alabama, are they going to be back in the college football playoffs, considering they were kind of, left out?
In short, yes. Looking through everything, I think Alabama, even though they may not look as dynamic as they have in years past with Tua Tagovailoa and with the absolute elite wide receiving core that they had last year, they've still got just tons of talent, and it's going to show this year. You're looking at more than likely Mac Jones starting this year under center. He had some valuable reps at the end of the year last year in a couple wins, and against Auburn, the Auburn game, even though they lost, he had a fairly decent game minus a couple of interceptions. But just kind of diving into their profile, I'm looking at them to have an 11 to 12 win season. If you're talking about winning an SEC title, I generally will chalk up a loss to the schedule, since the SEC is a very tough conference. As far as the players, you look at the best player on this team. I mean, there's a ton of talent. It's hard to break down one singular player. If you're going to pick out Alabama, but if I had to, I'd have to pick out Najee Harris. He's an elite running back. I would say he's probably the third best running back in the country behind Travis Etienne and Chuba Hubbard. I would say that if you just look at his highlight from last year against South Carolina and how he just single-handedly sent that team into a tailspin after eviscerating them on a run, he's an elite player. He's incredible. He's a great running back, and he's going to be one of the dark horse candidates for the Heisman. You want to talk about key losses? I think there's only one name that you can truly say that they lost is from this past year, and that's Tua. And the sad part about it is, we only got to see him. I would have loved to have had a chance to play him one more time. I understand, Joe Burrow had an amazing year, but Tua was an incredible athlete. He brought a unique dynamic to that offense, and he took an old school ground and pound offense and turned it into almost a version of the Mike Leach offense overnight with the talent that they had. And so he's going to be a huge loss to have to deal with this year, even with the talent they have coming back with Mac Jones and Bryce Young backing him up as well. And then with Alabama, the game of the year that I would say for them, it's going to be fairly early. Week 3 at home, taking on Georgia. I would guarantee that's going to be a game day game. Kirby Smart coming back to face his old coach. Presumably JT Daniels is your starter. Zamir White, what you're dealing with at Georgia. Honestly, it's going to be probably the first of 2 meetings between Georgia and Alabama, hint, hint. But that's kind of your outlook on Alabama this year, and a lot to process with them this year.
Do you think that they're going to be able to continue their success in the sense that, I don't know if I trust their quarterback coming in as much as obviously Tua, but for me, it all starts around the quarterback. So if he had a little bit of a few games of example towards the end of the year, but he lost against Auburn so he lost against Auburn, and so I don't know. What do you think? So for me, do you think out of the gate, are they good? They're going to win against Southern California and Dallas, right?
I think they'll smoke Southern Cal. I don't foresee this being a good year for Southern Cal in the first place. This is maximum fear and capacity for Clay Helton at USC. You cannot have any kind of slip up, and I just don't think that's a good recipe to start the year facing Alabama in Dallas. Now to talk about Mac Jones a little bit. I agree. there are definitely some questions left on the table for Mac Jones. But at the same time, in the same token, he threw for 1,500 yards last year, mostly in mop-up duty, 14 TDs, 3 INTs. 2 of those came against Auburn in very critical moments. One of those was actually both of them were pick sixes. But that's not something to turn your nose up at. I'm not saying he's going to be Tua or even AJ McCarron even, but I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, knowing what Alabama's been able to do. And to also say this, look, if Mac Jones doesn't work out, you have Bryce Love, who was the only player ranked ahead of DJ Uiagalelei in this latest class as far as quarterback rankings. This kid could be really good as well. So I think they've got talent all over the boards. Could they slip up? Potentially, yes. There's other questions within their defense that I don't know if they've answered from last year. And we saw how LSU tore them apart this past year. So there's a lot of questions, but I also think that their talent covers up for a lot of those questions.
Now, they get Georgia, really, let's say they get through USC, they go to Georgia State, then they get Georgia at home. So that's a good thing for them. So they'll probably be undefeated going into that game. And then I believe, if they win that game and they get past Georgia, then, you're looking at late October, maybe even all the way to LSU to where they have another big game, which that is an away game. So if you look at it, the end of the season, they get Texas A&M, Auburn at home. LSU is the only away game, and then you got Tennessee. I don't think Tennessee is there yet. We talked about them and their recruiting a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, so there's one team that they don't have to play from the East, and that is the Florida Gators, and that's the team that Alan kind of took a look at. Alan's going to be doing the SEC East, and Houston's going to be doing the SEC West tonight. So we'll be talking about that, going kind of back and forth. But Al, so Alabama, thankfully, well, I guess Florida maybe thankfully doesn't have to play Alabama. What's your first thought of Florida? Because I'm looking at it, the first 4 or 5 games, pretty good for them.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do this because it's a lot of research. You look, the West has all the big time teams. I know Georgia is in the East, and we all know how good Georgia's been. And they have been very good. But when it get past Georgia, there's a lot, to be desired here in the East. So it was kind of fun to do this research for me. But hey, Florida had a good year last year. They returned 4 of 5 from their offensive line. I look for Kyle Trask to take a step forward. And, last season he completed 67% of his passes for 3,000 yards. That's not bad. That's a good season. And it's what Florida's been missing for quite some time as a good quarterback. So, their offensive line returns mostly intact, which should be a boost, for that offense. Even though they lose most of their receiving threats from last year. I think they have some good players on the roster at receiver, Trevin Grimes and Jacob Copeland especially. Not to mention Kyle Pitts, who's one of the best tight ends in the country. So they're definitely going to have some weapons for Trask. He's going to have to find those guys. And, they do lose some key pieces on defense. CJ Henderson obviously went very high in the draft, and they lost their top pass rusher in Jonathan Greenard. I expect Florida to replace these players, though. They got guys like Kaiir Elam in the secondary, and then you've got a Zachary Carter, which is a one-time Clemson target, defensive end. I think these guys can step up and do a good job replacing these guys. This could be the year they make it back to the SEC championship game. I expect them to compete for that at least. And we're talking about players, and their best player in 2020, you got to go with Kyle Pitts. There's nobody else to really be in the conversation to me. He's one of the best in the country. He had 54 catches for 649 yards last year, 5 touchdowns. That's a lot for a tight end. That's major production for a tight end right there. And as a matter of fact, it beats most of the receivers probably in the SEC. That's impressive. So I think he's your guy there, no doubt about it. When you look at their biggest loss, I had to go with CJ Henderson. The cornerbacks are becoming much more important in a passing game. This game has evolved, quarterback passing game. That's kind of the shtick now. So I really think teams love that guy that can just shut down the opponent's number 1 wide receiver. Matter of fact, NFL teams are drafting these guys higher than ever because they want the same thing. They're looking for that kind of trend. They want a long corner who can be physical and shut down their guy. So I think CJ Henderson is going to be their big loss. And what's funny is you look at his stats from last year, you're not going to find a lot of stats on CJ Henderson. It's because nobody threw at him. And that's, as a matter of fact, you're going to hear that about another player tonight. And if you want to talk about their most important game, Florida's most important game is pretty easy. It's Georgia. They play them the end of October. And that's going to be the game probably for the division. See who wins the East and see who makes it back to the SEC championship game.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the schedule. These are one of the schedules that I'm talking about where, if you put this up against Clemson, I mean, Eastern Washington, Kentucky, South Alabama, South Carolina, Clemson already plays them. Georgia, Clemson plays Notre Dame. I would say, more of a similar team. They don't play LSU's, I guess, but Ole Miss, Florida State, Clemson already plays them. This is one of those things where I can see maybe people from the SEC West saying Clemson would have a struggle to compete. But when I look at this schedule for Florida, I don't really see anything that's overly glaring that Clemson couldn't compete at a high level. Now, it seems like from both you guys, Houston and Allen, it seems like both you guys are saying that we need to expect Florida and Alabama to be competing for an SEC title this coming season, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're going to at least compete. Georgia versus Florida, it's a hard pick right now. They're really evenly matched teams. And it's, I'll get into who I pick later. As far as, we do that at the end of the show probably. But it's going to be close, but I definitely think they're going to be in the conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I think Florida and Georgia, I agree with the game 100%. The biggest competition to me for Georgia is Florida. I have a slight edge to Georgia, but I think Florida, you look at their experience, you look at a lot of these players that are getting put together, this might be their time. And so I can totally see that and do expect them to be competing pretty consistently at the top for SEC East titles.
Now let's talk about a team that, last year did not compete for an SEC title, had a pretty tough season last year, and that is Arkansas. They struggled to get anything going. Chad Morris tried to get some things going, couldn't work it out there. But what do you think going into this season? Is this maybe a year where they turn things around?
No, not at all. And I feel bad for Chad Morris because I don't think people realize how hard it is to completely revamp the system he was doing. You're going from Brett Bielema's system of we're going to run it 5 times in a row and then maybe go deep every now and again to going to a completely spread offense. Now, it didn't help his case that you're getting boat raced by Western Kentucky and San Jose State at home. 2 really bad teams just blew you out on your home turf. But at the same time, I don't think what they're doing is necessarily smart. And taking Sam Pittman, you're not changing the offense that much with Kendall Briles, and then you're hiring what I would consider a slightly more questionable hire in Barry Odom compared to what you had with John Chavis the year before. As far as your record, there's not going to be much of a change. You went 2-10 the year before. You're going to slightly improve to 3-9. I don't think you may get beat by the underfeeders of the world too much. But you're going to be struggling this year. I honestly think that, and I'll tip the game of the year for them right off the jump is week 1 with Nevada, because you want to show that you're not going to get beat 45-19 at home. I know that there's bigger games on the schedule. You even play Notre Dame the week after, but what's the point of me saying that's the biggest game when you can't even beat someone of a lower tier? Now, talking about the players, to me, their best player is Treylon Burks. He led the team in receiving yards last year, only 29 receptions compared to the others. He was third on the team in receptions, but he had 475 yards receiving. He also averaged about 16 yards a catch. He had a ton of yards. He didn't have a touchdown, but he had a ton of yards. I think he makes another jump this year. A lot of people have been talking about him. And as far as their biggest loss, he had a couple of SportsCenter top 10 plays last year. His name was Cheyenne O'Grady, tight end for them. Led the team in receptions, led the team he was second on the team in touchdowns. He's a big target, big body target that they're losing. And it's already tough enough when you're dealing with what you're having this year to lose that type of leadership. So that's going to be really, really tough going for the Hogs this year.
Yeah, I'm looking at it too. Really, what you're saying is they're not going to win any SEC games, and they're definitely not going to win at Notre Dame. So their only hope is to beat those other teams like ULM and Charleston Southern, and the first game of the season, Nevada. That is a tough year for them. However, one good thing is that they don't only get the wins at the beginning of the season or at the very end of the season. They get one at the beginning, they get one kind of in October, and then they get one in November. So, hey, maybe that'll keep fans going, into the 2020 towards the 2021 season. Maybe, I kind of scratched my head on this on this coaching hire as well. But this is one of those schedules where I'll give them credit compared to Florida, in the sense that this is one where they're having to play Alabama, LSU. Now they do get Alabama, LSU at home, but then they have to go to Auburn and then go to Notre Dame, which Clemson is doing. But then they also get Texas A&M, but not at home, and really kind of like Dallas area, so Arlington. So not really a home game, but definitely an away game, I believe, in that sense. Jerry Jones loves Arkansas a lot. He's got a lot of ties there, so he wants to support them in that way. But getting beat up in the big stage is not always a good way to support your team. But yeah, so that's a pretty tough. About 5 or 6 games that I don't think many people would want to have to face every single year. And Arkansas is one of those teams that's just on the bad end of the stick most of the time. Another team that actually is on the flip side is always consistently talked about it being the best of their division, and that is, I can't believe Alan had to do this team, but the Georgia Bulldogs. Alan, I'm sure this is why you sent me all those nasty texts this week, because you had to do some Georgia Bulldog research.
Oh man, I tell you, it was a pleasure as always. And I'm sure Stephanie is watching. I know she was watching before. But yeah, when I took a look at Georgia, the big storyline here is, of course, Jamie Newman transferring from Wake Forest. That's a big deal for them. How good is he going to be in the SEC? I don't know. The defenses he faces are going to be a lot tougher. So I'm kind of taking a wait and see approach on Jamie Newman and how he does. But hey, I think it's an upgrade over whatever they were going to have. He's kind of the most talented guy in the room, I think. I do like the fact that they returned, the running back, Zamir White, James Cook, Kenny McIntosh, those guys. It should take some pressure off of Newman. But the Bulldogs lost a ton on the offensive line. And look, Georgia recruits really well on the offensive line. I'm not going to say they're going to be hurting on the offensive line. Okay, they recruit 5-star after 5-star, but they did lose a ton. They lost to the NFL. They lost one to transfer, and they lost their coach, their offensive line coach. So that could be a big deal. I think they're not going to fall off the map, but it's going to be a drop off, I think, regardless. All this combined with the fact they have to go to Alabama, that's a big game. Obviously, like Houston said, I agree with them. That's Alabama's biggest game. I don't have that as Georgia's biggest game. Again, I have Georgia and Florida as the biggest game because it's within their own division. So I think that's kind of the biggest game for both. I know that's kind of weird, or the same thing, picking the same thing for each team, but it is what it is. They're playing each other. They're the top two in the division, and that's just going to be their biggest game. So it's going to be fun to see who kind of comes out on top, and who knows, maybe one of them is a lot. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe Florida's at the bottom of the league. Maybe Georgia ends up a lot worse than we think. Who knows? But I think they're going to be battling out for that top position in the East, as they have been these past several years. When it comes to their best player, you can go with a lot of guys here, and I went with George Pickens. He had a good year last year. He didn't have, his stats weren't eye-popping or anything, but hey, they've got a running game that's just crazy. We know how that is. They run the ball a lot. They get a lot of stats there. So I don't expect the Georgia wide receivers as a whole to have, eye-popping stats like that. But he had 49 catches, 727 yards, 8 touchdowns. Others I considered were Jamie Newman and Richard LeCounte, but I don't think it's going to be that big a deal to pick George Pickens here. I think that's pretty solid. And as far as their biggest loss, let's see who I have here for their biggest loss is Andrew Thomas. Okay. I knew I was debating between a couple. Couldn't remember who it was. Andrew Thomas is the guy I went with. your left tackle, that's the guy that protects your quarterback. It's one of the most important positions on the field next to quarterback. You know how I like to talk about the guys in the trenches, especially the offensive line. And I think that's a big deal. Not to mention the fact that they lost several others as well. But you always want your anchor to be there at left tackle, and he is gone now. So I've already mentioned their most important game with Florida. So that's kind of my thoughts on Georgia. They're going to be competing. They're going to be talked about. They're going to be ranked high. So we'll see if they end up with chance at the playoff or in the SEC championship game.
Yeah, we actually had Virginia fans come in and comment on our previous video about Virginia and say that they felt better with their new quarterback than they did with Bryce Perkins. Not really sure where that was coming from. I asked them to elaborate a little bit. They just felt like that Bryce Perkins did a little bit too much and was maybe kind of not just kind of trying to take control of it with his feet. Mm-hmm. He wasn't a complete quarterback. They feel like this new quarterback is more complete for them, and they may be able to hang in the ACC. That fan said that they didn't believe that they were going to have to be able to hang with Georgia, in the sense that, again, this is another one where we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I scratch my head when I think, why are these ACC teams doing this to the conference, picking up games where it's an away game for them, and it's an away game for Georgia, but no, it's not. It's not an away game for Georgia. It's in Atlanta. And so you basically give them, and other parts of their state, a chance to view their favorite team. And it really hurts, I think, the ACC in general. And it's at the beginning of the year. Here you go. An SEC team clobbers an ACC team, and then you go. Move on from there. But Georgia gets past Virginia. Then you got East Tennessee State. Not hard there. Then at Alabama. If they can get past that, let's say they win at Alabama, I think that, I feel like Clemson will be ranked first going into the season, but maybe second. But if Georgia walks out of Alabama with a win, I feel like they jump everybody, and they may stay that way and continue to hold that, especially if they can beat Auburn at home after that. So they maybe continue to hold that number one ranking all the way to Florida. Like you said, that makes that Florida game in Jacksonville even more important. So did you tell me, I don't know if I caught this, but did you tell us the September 19th game what your prediction was? Do you think that Georgia walks in there and wins?
Against Alabama? No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we won't even have to worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, it's not to say they couldn't. I mean, Georgia's a really talented team. We all know that. We see the recruiting rankings. We see how they've been doing the past couple of years. They've gone toe-to-toe with Alabama about better than anybody, except for they just lose it right there at the end. But, hey, they've always been in the game. So I think they definitely could compete. But, no, I have Alabama winning that game.
All right. Well, if they come through Alabama, then they can still rebound. Louisiana Monroe, I can't say it. Then Vanderbilt, and then they get Auburn at home. Thankfully, Missouri, I think, is not really that big a deal. Then they can lick their wounds and go into Florida in the open date. Good thing for them is they get that open date right before playing Florida on Halloween. There's a ton of Halloween games this year. It's gonna be rocking. I'm gonna be dressed up in all my Star Wars gear, ready to go, cheering in my orange. I'm gonna have to get an orange Darth Vader outfit maybe for Halloween. But all right, so let's move over to the West. The next team on the list for Houston is Auburn. Now, Auburn has got to play SEC team in North Carolina in Atlanta. Here we go. Another game where they give up a home game and don't necessarily give it away game. But, this is kind of split in between the two teams, but I don't like it. I don't like it at all. The schedule looks pretty manageable, at least for Auburn at the beginning for me. Then they get into October. That's when they have to play at Georgia and then Texas A&M. So, Houston, what's your thoughts on Auburn? For me, I'm thinking this is another one. So it looks like the SEC has two teams on each side, maybe three teams on each side that could be in that 10-win or better position, depending on how things fall.
I think with Auburn, they're going to this will be a microcosm of Gus Malzahn. They have the capabilities. I can see them going 10-2 and ending up in a New Year's Six game. I can also see them at 8-4 or 7-5, depending on what they do. It just depends. I have them going 9-3 this year. And to go back to what you mentioned with North Carolina, I know you might not like it for the ACC, but this is a prove-it game for both teams. I think that for Auburn, they loved to play with fire last year with a lot of their games, especially game number 1 against Oregon. They were outplayed for the majority of that game until the final quarter, and it took a Hail Mary basically at the end for them to beat Oregon. I think this UNC team is a little more talented than that Oregon team currently. Now, I could be eating crow with them. I know their defense has had some issues. They may be giving up a ton of points, but when you have Auburn having to play players such as De'Ami Brown, Daz Newsome, Bo Corrales, and Sam Howell, who is going to be an extremely talented quarterback in the ACC, it's a prove-it game for UNC. They're coming for blood this game. This is a step up from South Carolina, from the opener for last year for them. So Auburn's going to really have to be on their toes facing a team in North Carolina. And that's why I think it's their biggest game. Like I said, they're 9-3. I think their best player is starting at the quarterback position. You have Bo Nix. He's a dual threat quarterback. Last year he threw for about 2,500 yards. And then he also was returning on their team as their second leading rusher. Now, it's only 313 yards rushing, but at the same time, second leading rusher on the team in that kind of wackadoo Gus Malzahn offense, throwing for as much as he did. And now you have Chad Morris leading the charge. So that's another element to this. Will Bo Nix take another step in his progress? Similarly, how we saw Taj Boyd do in the first year of his Chad Morris tutelage. The biggest loss to me is twofold. You have two guys on the defensive line that both went pretty high in the draft, and Derek Brown and Marlon Davidson. They're losing a lot of beef on that front line. Not saying that they're going to be hurting. I feel like the defensive line is somewhere that Auburn always seems to get 5-star, 4-star talents that go high in the draft. So they're probably going to be just fine up front, but that's still a lot of leadership that they're losing up front in Davidson and Brown. But overall, I think that they'll be in it. They could outperform what I think and definitely be in that mix for the SEC title game. It just depends on how they play. Are they the Gus Malzahn teams of old, or are they moving back in the direction like they did in 2013?
Well, I remember the beginning of this season where they played, I believe, Oregon, and it was one of those games where I'm like, Bo Nix did everything to lose the game, and they ended up winning that game. And I'm like, Oregon really should have probably held on to that and won that game, but unfortunately they didn't. Maybe this year North Carolina can step in and prove that they can compete with some of the big dogs out there. If Auburn beats North Carolina beats Auburn, then that could run a string of events where they're fighting for 6 wins at that point, maybe 6-7 wins. Instead of being a 10-11 win team, they're fighting. So it'll be interesting. It can go either way for them, but it's cool because I like the way the schedules are so far, because it seems like we'll find out early on who the contenders are and who the pretenders are, as my dad likes to say. But let's move over to Allen's team, and that is a team that, I wish that Louisville would have beat up on, but it's a team that Louisville just can't seem to get over. Now, you wonder why I'm talking about ACC teams. We've already talked about and analyzed ACC teams, and we're a Clemson Tigers show. We focus a lot on ACC teams and picks against the spread, and Kentucky-Louisville is always going to happen at the end of the season. And that's a game where I feel like, much in the North Carolina Auburn sense, I want to see an ACC team win. Same way in this sense. Now Kentucky has to go to Louisville at the end of the season, so we'll see what they can do. But Al, what do you think about that team in the blue and silver?
Look, I've been impressed with what Mark Stoops has done in Kentucky. We did a show a long time ago about coaches that should get a lifetime contract, and I picked Mark Stoops as my last guy, basically. And I did that because he kept beating South Carolina. It was really more of a shot at South Carolina. He let me down this past season, but I'm hoping they can get back on track this time. But, he's made a respectable team year in and year out at a place where nobody wins. I mean, I've just been really impressed with the job he's done there, and they have some big time talent on the offensive line. They have Drake Jackson, Darian Kennard. These guys are big time players. And they've got another couple that I think, at least 3 of them are probably going to get drafted this year, which is just crazy. And, they're going to get Terry Wilson, their quarterback, who got injured at the beginning of the last year, getting him back. Okay, so that should be big. Obviously, they're the big one they're losing. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, the biggest player they lose is Lynn Bowden Jr. He was kind of their do-it-all who came in from receiver to play quarterback, and, mostly, obviously, the Wildcat quarterbacks. He was doing a lot of running. But he was their guy. He was their offense. He was kind of like Bryce Perkins for Virginia. He was the offense. So that's going to be really tough to replace. But, they always seem to find a guy to be to be kind of that guy. And I'm guessing it'll be Terry Wilson this year. So, they lose a few playmakers on defense, but they always have a pretty good defense, pretty salty defense. They like to get at you and get after you. They play with an edge. So I think they'll be okay there. I hope I have them actually starting another streak against the Gamecocks this year. So I have them kind of mid of the pack in the SEC East. So I'm looking for them to have a pretty decent year. And so their best player right now, I have actually Darren Kennard at right tackle. And again, I debated between him and Drake Jackson as my two favorite offensive linemen on that team. But I think that's kind of who I'm going with. I already told you their biggest loss. Most important game. Right now I have their most important game as Missouri because I think that's when they become bowl eligible if they win that game later in the year.
You're always picking these offensive linemen. I don't know all these offense. I want you to pick some of the more flashy guys out there. I should have made a rule so you can do that for me. No disrespect to the offensive linemen. They definitely are one of the most important groups on the field for sure. And you have to go from Kentucky to Missouri. So I feel for you because Houston gets to jump into the reigning, defending national champions.
For real. Had to bring it up.
The wrong Tiger team. We got blasted. We got blasted a lot last year for our comments. Mark Childress, maybe watching us, maybe listening. He got blasted a lot on YouTube for our strong comments. Now, I went and watched the game up to halftime, and I start to get real sick towards halftime for whatever reason. I'm not really sure. Maybe it was something I was snacking on. But I cannot get past halftime, much like the Alabama game in Phoenix that Alan and I went to. But LSU, they lost a lot. Now they've lost their big star quarterback. He was the number one draft pick, Joe Burrow. So what can they do now? They have a big time flashy guy behind that's going to take over that a lot of people are very excited about. They also lost their offensive coordinator as well, or one of their offensive coordinators, I guess, their passing game coordinator. So, Houston, you begged to do a review on LSU. Give us your in-depth thoughts. Will LSU come back? Because at this point, if LSU comes back into that playoff, contention role, we're now saying Alabama, Auburn, LSU, and then on the other end, we're saying Florida, Georgia, Kentucky are all going to be pretty legit teams. Elite teams maybe going into the 2020 season. That's a pretty heavy or top heavy there, considering some of the other teams.
Yeah, well, I would like to say congratulations to LSU for winning the national title. I was wrong in my assessment last year. I do apologize, and I want to congratulate you on this upcoming season as you accept a bid to the Music City Bowl, because that's where you're going. They got a ton of talent. They lost a lot of talent. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. They could go 10-2. They could go 12-0. I don't know. But to me, I'll start with the losses. You lost Joe Burrow, and if you want to put it all on Joe Burrow, that's fine. But I mean, that's not just that. You lost Justin Jefferson. You lost Clyde Edwards-Helaire. The biggest loss to me is Joe Brady. I've never seen a one-year transfiguration of a quarterback and a system like their offense did under one passing game coordinator. You can say that Steve Ensminger is the OC. I ain't buying it. That was Joe Brady. And what they're replacing him with is Scott Linehan. Scott Linehan is replacing Joe Brady this year. And I'm waiting to see with this. Look, Scott Linehan has not been a very successful offensive coordinator. I mean, he was with the Dallas Cowboys for a long time, but he wasn't able to really get off the ground when you have talent like Dak Prescott and Zeke Elliott and Amari Cooper. So what are you saying he's going to be able to do with the talent at LSU, especially when you're dealing with a very critical situation at quarterback with Miles Brennan coming in to start? I would say this year you're probably and look, this could go sideways really quickly if they start slow. The SEC West is very talented this year. Okay, you have to play at A&M, you have to play at Auburn, you have to play Alabama, you have to play at Florida, and you have to play two new coaches that are going to be gunning for you this year in Lane Kiffin in Ole Miss and Mike Leach in his new system at Mississippi State. That's all to say that you're playing Texas this year to start the season. That's your biggest game. All right. Similarly, like I said, with Auburn and UNC, you have Texas coming in, who wasn't far off from beating you last year. They played you tit for tat up until the end when you pulled away. They're not losing that much talent. I feel like Texas can give you a very, very tough game. If you lose that game at home in Death Valley to start the year, then you could really see some negative momentum coming your way. Wait and see. Like I said, I could be wrong. They could be back in the national title game. I'd welcome a chance to play them again. But I don't know. I think 8-4 is your tops, and I think Texas is your biggest game. Oh, and by the way, your best player, I should have told this too. Your best player is Jamar Chase. There's two really dynamic players, and I think Jamar Chase is the most dynamic wide receiver on the planet. No, I bashed on them a lot, but Jamar Chase destroyed Clemson last year, and he's going to destroy a lot of defenses this year. He's definitely the person that you're going to have to cover this year.
Yeah, that guy, again, I started getting sick to my stomach. I could not continue watching the game. I don't really remember what happened towards the end, but what I will say is, A.J. Terrell was all over him, and still he caught passes. So one of them was almost like he caught it between his forearm and his bicep, planted perfectly by Joe Burrow. So big props for LSU for winning the national championship game. I don't believe they're going to be back. I mean, there's a lot of changes for sure. It all starts with quarterback, but I think that they also have a away game at Florida. They took advantage of that being a home game this year. Away games are tough, Not the Arkansas away game, but the Florida away game is going to be kind of tough. Now, they do have Nicholls State before that, so they can kind of, ease into that game. So that may help them in that sense. But they also get an open date before Alabama. They host Alabama at home. So, they do have a little bit easier way in that sense. But towards the end of the year, last two games of the season at Auburn, at Texas A&M. And we all know away games, no matter what conference you're in, away games just are harder. There are a lot of things that could happen. Crazy things happen nighttime away games in the SEC and really anywhere. But I'm excited to see what will happen. I don't think that they'll make it into the national championship game again. And that'll be a good thing because I don't want to see them ever again. But I do have a friend that's an LSU fan. And again, that was a great team. Clemson had opportunities. LSU fans love to talk about, they blew Clemson out of the water. Okay, yeah, they walked away with it towards the end. Yeah, I don't really remember it. Like I said, kind of blacked out. But what I will say is that, Clemson had opportunities even in LSU territory and, just couldn't figure it out. Not because it wasn't there. Trevor Lawrence really had probably one of the worst games I've ever seen. I went back and watched only the third down plays. And just about every third down play was overthrown. And you can't have that from your star quarterback, and I don't think you're going to see that very often from Trevor Lawrence. It just was a bad day to have a bad day for the quarterback for sure. But let me tell you about our second segment sponsor. Is kind of the halfway point. We only got just a few more teams to go, and we want to kind of make sure we finish tonight with the SEC Network or SEC Conference Preview, football conference preview. So let me tell you about Tiger Sports. We don't just dress for success, we TS for success. Tiger Sports Shop, located downtown Clemson or on Tiger Boulevard. They've been a sponsor of ours and provide our apparel for the show. I am wearing one of their exclusive Tiger Sports Shop polos, and I'm wearing a Clemson baseball hat. Yeah, that's right. You heard it. From here first, I'm wearing a baseball hat, joining the rest of the crew with their hats. So this is one you can get from Tiger Sports Shop. Now, this is one I believe it's not Tiger Sports. It is a Nike hat. And if you're watching over on YouTube, we got a ton of comments about what LSU is going to do, what they can do, what they can't do. Some people saying Tennessee is going to surprise us. Blake gets in and says Tennessee is going to surprise a lot of people. Carson says LSU will be a good 10-2 team, he believes, but it's going to have a problem with having to replace Joe Burrow for sure. So a lot of people in there in the chat. If you're watching or listening over on YouTube, thank you so much. Make sure you like and share the video with your friends. If you're watching or listening over on Facebook, make sure you do the same as well. And also don't forget to check out southlandclub.com. That is our website that, all three of us actually are participating in. So we really appreciate you going in and checking it out. If you want to talk with us, chat with us, or read some of our articles, you can do so over there as well. Houston, you just talked about LSU. So you kind of got the big team out of the way. You kind of got some of the big teams at the beginning, but you got a couple left. But Alan, this is one, no more Kelly Bryant, Missouri. All right, so what's Missouri going to do? Looks like they start out Central Arkansas, then Vanderbilt, and then they have to travel to South Carolina. Always one of those games where you never know which team's going to win. Eastern Michigan, at Tennessee, at BYU. Hey, Houston just did an article recently about BYU and how awesome their stadium is. So might be a nice little travel game there to go check out the Rockies. But Alan, continuing into the rest of the end of the season, they have to play harder games. Like they get Georgia at home, but then they have to travel to Florida, and they also have to travel to Mississippi State, who's going to have Mike Leach now. What's your thoughts on Missouri?
I think Missouri's schedule is actually really easy compared to what it normally is, and it's I still don't expect much from the Missouri Tigers. They just have a ton of question marks this year, especially on offense coming into the year. The quarterback, they don't know who the quarterback's going to be. They have questions on offensive line. The receivers are gone. Missouri's kind of made a living these past several years with a quick passing attack over the middle, a good quarterback that can get the ball out fast and hit the slant routes and that kind of thing. And I just don't know that they're going to have that this year. They're going to need to rely on Larry Roundtree, who's their running back. He's kind of their guy at that position. And it's going to be tough if their line can't create some holes. I think he had his first year had some pretty good production. I think it went down last year. I'm hoping it doesn't take another step back for him this season as well. They do return on defense a guy named Nick Bolton, who's a killer linebacker. You'll actually hear his name later in the show. He'll kind of help anchor that defense, and he's going to really need to anchor it because that's really the best guy by far on their defense. So they're really going to have to step up and try to make some plays on defense. But look, they have like I said, I think they have a pretty easy schedule, even though it is kind of heavy at the end of it. But I think that can kind of push them up, maybe not quite at the bottom of the SEC, but I do have them pretty low. As a matter of fact, I have, as far as their best player is concerned, I have Nick Bolton, who I just mentioned, linebacker. He had 103 tackles last year, 8.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack, and 2 interceptions. They also have a pretty good defensive lineman named Kobe Whiteside, but I think it's Nick Bolton by a long shot as their best player. As far as their biggest loss, I have Jordan Elliott, their defensive tackle. He had 8.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. I think they're going to miss that defensive production this year for sure. And their biggest game, I actually have that as South Carolina being their biggest game. And I have it because, I don't think Missouri is going to be very good, like I mentioned. But I think they should start the season 2-0 with those teams that they're going to play. And if, then they play the Gamecocks before they get another easy game in Eastern Michigan. So if they win against South Carolina in that third game of the year, that would have them likely off to a 4-0 start and maybe give them the confidence to win a couple more games, possibly make a bowl. But that's as most that I can see from them this year. That's best case.
Yeah, I can see that too. I mean, that's going to be really, if you look at it, there's another September game that is a big key game. If we can just get to college football, y'all, if we can just get to September, just fight through COVID and, work to heal our country and, build bridges with each other instead of burning them. If we can just get through to September, man, college football is going to get here, and there's going to be a lot of games at the beginning of the season that are going to be huge and impactful throughout the rest of the year. And I'm excited for it. Now, like I said, I don't know how many fans are going to be there, and we might answer that question towards the end, but let's get on to Mississippi State. This is one, lot of talk around them. They've got 2 brand new quarterbacks on the staff, are in the quarterback room. They also have a big time passing game head coach in Leach. What do you think is going to happen with Mississippi State? Houston, now let me ask you this, though. One big game at the beginning of the season. This one's with an ACC team at NC State. So NC State, I've already said, is going to be, I think they're going to rebound. I think that one last year's bad season was, just a blip, because normally NC State is a 9-win team, or give or take. So I'm thinking that NC State at home can beat Mississippi State. But what you got?
Well, I tend to let's agree to disagree on what we feel about NC State. I don't know.
Do you remember my rule from the last show? Do you remember my rule?
Absolutely. NC State's the best. They'll be competing with Clemson for a national championship or ACC title. Here's my thing. At the beginning of the season, I think Mississippi State, it actually falls at a very good point for them. NC State's rebounding, you're correct, and they may turn out to be good, but I don't think they are playing the type of caliber team that Mississippi State can be at the right point in the season. Now, I'm a little bit leery on what this offense is going to look like. Look, even with the way that Joe Moorhead and Dan Mullen ran their offenses, very run-heavy teams. In fact, your best player that I'm saying is a running back. In Kylan Hill. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, he led the entire SEC in rushing last year. And that was I might be wrong on that, honestly, but I gotta go back and fact check. But I know he was one of the rushing leaders in the conference, basically to say that. So how are you going to integrate him as far as your attack goes going forward this year? Now, your loss you're looking at is somebody named Willie Gay. Willie Gay, he missed a ton of games last year because of violation of team rules, but at the same time, he was kind of their energy guy. He was a difference maker on defense. Their defense kind of held their own when he was in there, so losing that leadership is a big deal. I would say their game of the year this year actually is Texas A&M. And that's their week 5. So October 3rd. And this always tends to be the deal with Mississippi State. They always get up for Texas A&M somehow. You know, if we remember a few years ago when Johnny Manziel was playing them, they struggled playing Mississippi State when they had Dak Prescott. Or you had a team with Kenny Hill. Kenny Hill was the quarterback. I believe that was a big nationally ranked game. They got blown out in Davis Wade Stadium. So Mississippi State and Texas A&M, that's a big game. I'm projecting 6-6 this year. I think kind of within the range of Mike Leach, you're going to have some games that they're going to sneak up and beat some people. And it's really hard for some teams to be able to hold that attack. But I also see them having their own issues and as a first-year team under a new coach and kind of having to go through those growing pains. So not a bad team, definitely a bowl-eligible team, but kind of a wait-and-see team going forward.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I mean, I think that, you know, based on what you're saying, it's easy that this team could be undefeated going into October. They're going to have to decide, you know, they're going to have to be on their game to beat Texas A&M at the beginning of October, even though that is a home game, so it's good for them. They get some rest after Texas A&M and then have to travel to Alabama and then turn around 7 days later, travel to LSU, then turn around on Halloween and have to play at home against Auburn. Now, thankfully, they draw Missouri and Kentucky, but it would almost be like cruel and unusual punishment if they drew anybody else. So thankfully, they didn't get any big time teams from the other side, because, you know, this is not a fun October if you're a Mississippi State fan, for sure. That, if anything, that looks like a gauntlet for sure. And thankfully, they have an open date, but it's not going to really help that much. Towards the end of the season, maybe a little bit better in November, but October is going to be a let's just survive, kind of mentality. But, you know, you never know. Maybe Leach can do something and kind of fool us all, but we'll see. Al, so tell us about the Gamecocks. We don't really want to hear. Let's skip them. No.
Yeah.
No.
Hey, can y'all cue up Sandstorm or anything? You know, maybe we should have that.
No.
Oh, please don't.
I can, and I'm not. I can. Whoa. Look.
He did that. You saw it. You have it on tape now. He's recorded.
Yeah.
For those of you paying attention on our podcast, Houston just did a hand signal that is very offensive.
It really means hang 10, but I don't know why they stole it to mean Spurs up. But hey,
exactly.
All I know is we're looking for a new writer at SouthlandClub.com.
Hey, I was just showing a dead chicken. I was just doing a dead chicken. That's it.
Look, South Carolina, another year. South Carolina, we're going to have to hear another year about how tough their schedule is. And look, they're right. Outside of the SEC East, they play LSU, they play A&M as their cross division opponents, and in the West, and they have their annual game with Clemson. That's about as tough as it gets, guys. It really is. I look for Ryan Helinski to take the next step. I don't know if you're going to notice that, on the stat sheet because of what he's got around him, but I think he will take the next step in his progression, assuming he doesn't, get beat out by freshman Luke Doty. I like his potential in that role. Well, look, they lose their biggest playmaker in Brian Edwards. Brian Edwards was a heck of a receiver, a guy that Clemson recruited at safety. I thought would have made a heck of a safety, and heck, he ended up making a heck of a receiver at South Carolina. He did a really good job there. They really need to see some improvement in their offensive line. It's to be able to protect Ryan Helinski, to be able to give him some time to make some plays. They lose a lot of their running backs. I think they lose their top 3 running backs as well. So they're going to really look for their defense to kind of take a step forward. They're really going to look for Zach Pickens to develop. He was a huge recruit right here. Clemson, was involved with him for a while, ended up going to South Carolina. They have two great players already in the secondary. They have J.C. Horn and Israel Mukuamu. Those are 2 guys. Mukuamu is a long corner. That is a guy that can really move for his size. It's very impressive. He's a great athlete, and I think he's going to have a lot of things to say this year. He's going to NFL scouts are going to drool over that kind of size. And he can play. He can carry that size too, which is impressive at corner. So look. They start off the season with 2 should-be layups. I say should be. We don't ever know when a Citadel might happen again. But they start out with Coastal Carolina and East Carolina, so they should theoretically start 2-0. I'm actually going to give them the nod over Missouri right now because they have that game at home to start 3-0. So it's going to be interesting to see what they have. Like I said, I think their biggest loss. I think a lot of people would think their biggest loss was Javon Kinlaw after he went so high in the draft. I think it's Edwards because I think they have people that can replace Javon Kinlaw, not to be Javon Kinlaw. Don't get me wrong here, but they have some talent there. Aaron Sterling is a good defensive lineman. I think Zach Pickens has it in him to be a good player there. I think the fact that they lose their outright best receiver is going to be tough on them. And as far as their best player, this was kind of tough. It was tough to see, just kind of go between J.C. Horn, Israel Mukuamu. I like both of those guys. And Aaron Sterling really has the stats, but I ultimately went with Horn. I think he's the best player. I think his stats will not pop off the page, like I mentioned with C.J. Henderson from Florida, because they don't throw his way a lot. He does not get the opportunities that these other guys do. So he's a good player. I think he'll get drafted pretty high. I believe it was Houston I was talking with that said something about they have some projections of him in the first round. I thought that was a little high. I still seem to think that's a little high, but we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to say he's their best player in 2020. As far as their biggest game, I have them at Kentucky. Okay, I told you I have Kentucky starting another streak, but I think that's their biggest game this year. I told you I'm giving the Gamecocks some credit. I'm giving them a little bit of credit. They have them starting the season 3-0. So when they go to their first, kind of evenly matched, the road test. It's kind of got to go their way, or I think they're off to a 5-7 season with no bowl.
Yeah, as you were talking, I'm looking at the schedule. I'm right on track with you as well. That Kentucky game could really set them up to, maybe they win at Kentucky, and then maybe they go into Florida. They know they're going to lose that. They lose it, but they give a great fight. Then they're very, very confident going into Tennessee because they know they got an open date after that. They know they can kind of relax a little bit, maybe lick some wounds, right? Maybe they make it to that open date. 5-1, maybe, but that could happen. Then they got Texas A&M, Georgia, LSU, Clemson. So after the open date really starts to swing the other way, Texas A&M, Georgia at LSU, and then at Clemson. Those are going to be some tough ones. They may only win 2 after that. So the most you could see would be maybe 7. I could see it most, but that Kentucky and Missouri game is going to really kind of be really important for them because they can carry that momentum or it just dies in September. Again, another team where live and die by what happens in September. A lot is going to happen in September to show us who is out there for sure. Houston's up next with a team that we've already talked about a ton about their recruiting, and Allen's been plastered all over their locker room. He's gotten, if you don't know this, Allen posted a thing about their recruiting. We talked about their recruiting. It was hated so much by Tennessee that it got on their Vol Nation website. And right now, the top viewers for our site or our YouTube channel this past 28 days has been from volnation.com. So thank you so much, Vol Nation, for being our top viewers, even beating Clemson viewers. But, Alan kind of ruffled some feathers over there or ruffled some of the dog fur over there, I guess, or whatever you want to call Rocky Top. But so what do you got for Rocky Top? And I guess I jumped at Rocky Top. I really was supposed to go to Ole Miss, but I'll go to Rocky Top, Al.
Man, putting me on the spot. Now I got to do 2 in a row. I don't know if I'm prepared for that.
I'm sorry.
No, seriously. I'm ready to rock and roll. The Volunteers, look, they improved in the win column last season. They had 8 wins. Most of the country kind of left them for dead after their embarrassing loss to Georgia State to begin the year. But hey, look, I was glad that I got Tennessee in the East because, we have a resident Vol fan here in Philip Stedman who likes to discuss all things football. And look, he had a lot of good thoughts when it came to them. I ran some of my ideas by him to kind of get his opinion. Look, they were able to finish the season last year on a 6-game winning streak. It wasn't against any impressive teams. Okay, they beat kind of the lower teams of the SEC, but it's hard to discount a 6-game winning streak. That's a good thing. And I think with Tennessee, it all comes down to quarterback. They're really searching to find that quarterback. They haven't had one since Josh Dobbs that I think is impressive enough to give them any kind of consistency. So can Guarantano be that guy? Does someone else take his place? I hear a lot about the freshman Harrison Bailey. I think he's a freshman. I hear a lot about him. I think Philip likes to talk about that guy a lot. So maybe they find some consistent quarterback play. I don't know. They have some good players on defense. I think regardless, the Vols have a great shot to finish about third. I have them actually at third in the East. I have them I think I have them going 8-4, 5-3 in the SEC. So that's not going to be too bad. It's not too bad. They're on their way up. It's still a couple years away. They've got to find a good quarterback. If they don't find a good quarterback, they're not going to be a team to reckon with and compete for that top spot. Right now, their best player at Tennessee, I have Trey Smith, their offensive lineman, left tackle. I considered a couple of others. I really wish Philip needs to be right beside me right now because I need to ask him how to pronounce this. But I considered others like Eric Gray and Henry 2020, maybe a linebacker. I'm not really sure how to say that. But those guys are players. They have some talent for sure. Their biggest loss, as far as that is concerned, I have Darrell Taylor, their linebacker. He had 10 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks. That's really impressive. And that's kind of their biggest loss. As far as their biggest game is concerned, I have it as Florida. They play Florida at the end of September. I think it's Tennessee's chance to kind of make that statement win and put themselves at least early in the conversation to compete for the East. So I have Tennessee playing Florida being their biggest game.
And it's another September game that we're talking about. For the SEC teams, September games are going to be huge for them. Alan, chat getting in here saying that Tennessee Volunteer fans creating potholes because of Alan. Also saying that somebody said Alan can't even drive through Eastern Tennessee. Oh, man, Billy, that is so true. That is so true. I mean, Alan, you better just, cover your head or something or roll your windows up for sure because Tennessee Volunteer fans do not like you.
Yeah.
But they like to support our show, whether or not they believe it or not. Watching the show supports the show, so we appreciate that. But again, this is another team where I'm looking at it and I'm listening to you and I'm like, a lot is going to go on in September and it's make or break, and they could go 5 wins, they could go 10 wins, but it's all going to be kind of worked out early. Hopefully, there'll be more variety in this sense, but it seems like a big time separation going to be there. What do you think about Tennessee at Oklahoma? Is that going to be good for them, bad for them? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to beat Oklahoma. I just don't think they can compete there yet. I think they've got to find, like I said, it's all about quarterback play, and until they find a quarterback that proves he can win the big games with any kind of consistency, I don't think they're going to be able to compete with the likes of Oklahoma.
Yeah, I don't think they're there yet, but I think they, are recruiting the way they need to. But on the other hand, like we talked about before. And I don't mean to be offensive to any Tennessee Volunteer fans, but, getting 35 3-star players, will build depth. I guess, right?
Yeah.
All right. So next up, which was supposed to be previously up, was Ole Miss, and Lane Kiffin started calling me during while you were talking, Alan, just really getting on me about skipping his team. And I apologize, Lane, when you're listening to this, just go back. In the replay on the podcast, I'll switch it. All right. So Houston, we got Baylor. They're going to Houston to play Baylor. So you'll probably have some ties there. Then they got Southeast Missouri State. That is tough one, right? And then they get Auburn at home, at LSU, Alabama. So those 3 games right there, again, September 19th, 26th, and October 3rd, early on in the season, going to have some tough games to kind of get through. What are your thoughts for Ole Miss?
For Ole Miss, in a similar way to Mississippi State, there's a lot of questions, a lot of teams, like a lot of teams that I have questions about. Ole Miss is one of them, but I tend to have more of an upside view to them. They have a lot of talent. That starts with their quarterback, John Reese Plumlee, and John Reese Plumlee led the team in rushing last year. He also was their second leading passer after taking over for Matt Corral midway through the season last year. So, he's a very talented player. You also pair him with someone like Jerrion Ealy, a running back that Clemson was high after a couple classes ago. A lot of talent. Ole Miss is not short for talent. Similar to Tennessee recruiting, I guess. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, nod, nod on how they deal that. But there's a lot of talent there. And you have a coach like Joey Freshwater himself, Lane Kiffin, coming to town. I think he's actually a good fit. I think this is something that he can build on. He got DJ Durkin to be his defensive coordinator, a new up-and-coming offensive coordinator named Jeff Lebby. And I think they're going to be okay. I think 7-5 is probably that mark this year that I'm saying they're going to be at, and I think that's going to be the right mark for them to aim for. If you're at 7-5 or anything better than that, I think that's a win in year one for Lane Kiffin. I think your biggest loss is Benito Jones, very resurgent senior, finished with 10 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks, and 10 QB or 6.5 or 7 QB pressure. Sorry, I have my stats lined up wrong here. So you're losing that leadership. You're losing a very talented linebacker. And that's a really big loss. But at the same time, I think that they have enough talent to kind of back that up this year. And then their biggest game, I wouldn't say right out of the gates with Baylor. I think probably week 3 with Auburn. That's your first real big SEC competition. I think they can beat Baylor. Baylor's going to be taking a step back this year. They're dealing with their own coaching change. I wait and see with them. They may be okay, but I think Ole Miss will beat them, and it's going to set up for a showdown in the Grove September 19th against Auburn. Once again, Auburn's in these prove-it games. If they're able to make it past North Carolina, you got to prove it again with a new up-and-coming coach, a new system in place, with a lot of talent in Ole Miss.
And yet again, September 19th. So let's just get to September 19th, man. That is the date of some big time games. October 31st as well. But, I'm looking forward to it. I can see Lane Kiffin out the gate again, getting in a win against Baylor and then going into Auburn as well. So agree with you there. Let's give you 2 in a row. All right, so I'm not going to let you sleep on this one. Let's give you two in a row, and then Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, but you'll finish this up with Vandy.
You got it.
All right, so Texas A&M. I got a couple of friends at my church that are Texas A&M fans, Texas A&M grads. They unfortunately found out what it's like to play against Clemson past couple of years, but that's gone now. No more Jimbo Fisher on Clemson's schedule, which is kind of nice. I'm glad to get him out of the way. But what you got? So they've got Abilene Christian, North Texas, Colorado, Arkansas, and Arlington, as we talked about a little bit earlier. They got 4 games before they have to go. They don't go on a away game until they get to October at Mississippi State. So what are your thoughts about A&M?
Well, let's break down this schedule a little further. So you mentioned up until October 3rd, you go to Mississippi State. If you're able to beat them, you go to 5-0 October 10th. You knock off Fresno State, so you're 6-0. You're setting up an October 17th showdown in Jordan-Hare Stadium on the plains of Auburn, Alabama. That is the biggest game this year, and I think that's going to be the tale of what this season means. Now, I have them going 9-3. I think there's going to be a couple slip-ups. I think they're still working through this, but this could be a real turning point this year. Now, let's say they're able to beat Auburn. You're 7-0. You go to South Carolina 8-0. Then you have Ole Miss and Vanderbilt 9 and 10-0. So you could be a potential 10-0 team going to Alabama on November 21st and then finishing the season with LSU. Now, if you have a 10-0 Texas A&M team, there's going to be a lot of hype. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I think it's more likely that you may slip up at Auburn. I think that's going to happen. But if they don't, they have a real shot at making it not only to the SEC title game, but to the national championship, or at least to the playoff. I think that starts with Kellen Mond. I think we saw more of what we've come to expect out of Kellen Mond 2 years ago, obviously, when we were biting our nails and hoping he doesn't complete a 2-point conversion at the end of the game. He went off that game. He went off against LSU. I wouldn't say necessarily regressed, but he didn't have any of those games as much as he did 2 years ago. He had his struggles. When you talk about especially some larger opponents that they faced, they struggled against Clemson. They struggled and lost at home to Auburn. They struggled and lost fairly handily to Alabama at home. You lose to Georgia, and then you get blown out in LSU 50-7. So he didn't have the games that he had 2 years ago. I'm looking for a bounce back year, especially with his dual threat ability. Now, this big loss, this is something that not a lot of people think about for their biggest loss. Punter. But when you're talking about somebody like Braden Mann, who can flip the field even if they're in their own end zone, that's a big loss. And I don't know what they've got signed. I don't keep up with the recruiting of punters that much. But you're talking about someone who, if I remember correctly, flipped the field several times and put Clemson in some hostile territory 2 years ago when we were in College Station. And he did the same a couple times last year as well. He's a weapon when you're talking about that type of leg strength. So losing that is a major, major key. And then, like I said, the biggest game of the year, October 17th at Auburn, it's going to make or break their season. If you're undefeated in that game, that's it. That's it. You don't advance any further as far as your national title talk if you can't win on the Plains this year. I think that's the biggest game this year, and I think it's a possibility. I may change my guess 10 times up until that point. I think Auburn wins, but I think to that point, that could be the biggest game of the year for A&M.
I remember watching Auburn versus Texas A&M. Now, we thought going into last season, Texas A&M versus Clemson was going to be probably the best non-conference game of that season. It ended up not being at all the best non-conference game because Texas A&M just ended up, they lost their running back in Corbin, who's now at Florida State. Then they go to play, or the Auburn travels to Texas A&M. And it's like both teams want to lose the game. And I watched the entire game. And this is what just drives me crazy. Alan can probably remember this. I feel like this is like what we talked about back in October of last year. It drove me nuts to watch a team run the play clock all the way to 0 before they snap the ball, even when they're down 14 points. They're running the ball, the play clock down to the very last second. I don't understand Jimbo Fisher's mentality, and I don't trust him. They didn't win any important game last year. They lost them all. Some of them at home. So you're telling me, can they do it this year? I don't know if I'm on that train. Yeah. I definitely don't think they're going to beat Alabama or LSU. Kellen Mond. Is Kellen Mond the guy? I don't know. I mean, I'm seeing when I'm looking at some of the top quarterbacks, one of my articles recently, top quarterbacks to look for next year, I'm seeing this and I'm like, Kellen Mond's on this list. I don't see that yet. I mean, I know he was a big 5-star guy. I just don't see it. Maybe I'm missing it. But when I watched some of the Texas A&M games, it was not very impressive. It was impressive for Isaiah Simmons. It was they ended up making Bo Nix end up looking good. But for Texas A&M, no. Kellen Mond, no. So we'll see what they can do. See if they can turn things around. I don't know. I just don't. I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling 11 wins from them. I just don't. Ooh. Okay. Let's get off that. So, Alan.
Yep.
Finishing it up. Wrapping it all up. But before we wrap it up.
Save the best for last.
One of the things that I love so much about Clemson University is the ring.
Yep.
And I got this bad boy after a lot of doubt, after a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, moving on, a lot of study hours, a lot of coffee. Let's just not say blood, sweat, and tears. Sweat, coffee, tears, no blood. But I got this thing many, many, many years later, but I'm very proud of it. Another thing that I'm very much proud of is this ring plaque that I got. Now you like that? You didn't think it was an ad, but now it is. But I got this Clemson ring plaque, and it is just like the ring. And, you got a lot of people graduating right now, not able to really enjoy that graduation ceremony, but they can enjoy the fact that they got a Clemson ring, and they can also enjoy this Clemson ring plaque. You can get a link. There's a link in our description on our YouTube channel. It is about 3.5 pounds, can go on your bookshelf, can go on your wall, and man, it looks just like the ring. It has the letters and the numbering and the palm tree and the C, just like what you see on your Clemson ring. Go check that out. They also, I believe, have Texas A&M and old Clemson. So if you're maybe a graduate from many, many moons ago, maybe you could go check out the old style, the original style ring, if you want to get something like that. But like I said, you don't have to just be a graduate from this year. I got that one this year, and I'm 2018 in my MBA. Alan can get one at his 2009 year or whatever year you'd like.
Dude, all right. Are you ready for this? It's Vandy. I mean, do we even need to talk about Vandy? Okay.
Finish it up, baby.
All right. Look, I look for Vandy to be Vandy again, okay, this year. Look, I mean, they finished last season 3-9. They need to find a quarterback, and they really got to hope he's just capable of being serviceable. I just don't know what they're going to expect here. Most of their offensive weapons from last year, including their running back Keyshawn Vaughn, they're gone. They're all out of there. Their offensive line is going to need to vastly improve, as they gave up almost 30 sacks last year. Their defense returns, mostly intact, but they were the worst in the SEC last season. So I guess maybe you hope that they can take a step forward with experience. All that said, I have them, in the cellar of the SEC East and the SEC altogether. But I do have their best returning player as Dayo Odeyingbo, defensive end. I don't even know if I even began to pronounce that right. I almost picked somebody else just because I didn't want to have to pronounce that name. But he had 12 tackles for loss and 1.5 sacks. So, he's kind of who I have as their best player coming back. Their biggest loss I have is Keyshawn Vaughn, their running back. He had 198 rushes, 1,028 yards, 9 touchdowns. So that's going to be a big piece of their offense that is gone. Their biggest game I have is Kansas State. It's an out-of-conference game, quality opponent, and it's an opportunity to get another notch in that SEC belt, because nobody expects anything from the Commodores. Then nobody expects them to win anything in the SEC. I don't even have them winning one SEC game. So, to beat Kansas State and to have the bragging rights that we all love to hear about how great the SEC is, that would be a big game for them to win. I have that as their biggest game of the year.
So you're basically saying they're the Arkansas of the East.
All right.
Well, I appreciate everyone joining us. If you didn't realize, this show was very in-depth, and that's why I decided to be only the host and let the experts, Houston and Alan, take over for the night. And I really appreciate all their hard work and effort and research, even though they hate me right now. And I got a bunch of nasty text messages from them. I really appreciate all the stuff they did. Man, I hope this enlightened you a little bit. If you forgot or missed anything, you can go check out our replays over on YouTube. I'll get them up later on this week. And if you'd like to check out more from the show, we have southlandclub.com, so go check that out. But if you already don't like and share or follow our show, make sure you do so on the Morgan Thomas Show on Facebook and on YouTube. We do not have Morgan Thomas Show on Twitter because Twitter is the most toxic place to be at right now in the state of the country. So I try to stay away from Twitter as much as I can. But hey, if you're watching from Twitter or Periscope, we appreciate you. And good job, sticking through everything that's going on social media right now. But again, Houston, Alan, what you got before we let everybody go?
Well, I did want to tell you my predicted finish real quick of the SEC East. So basically what I have Florida edging out Georgia. Okay. I'm giving the nod to Kyle Trask here, as much as I don't like to pick against Georgia because they've been in it every year. I think they're going to make it back to the SEC championship for the first time since 2016 when they played Alabama. So I have Florida 1, Georgia 2, Tennessee 3, Kentucky 4, South Carolina 5, Missouri 6, and Vanderbilt 7. And I want to go ahead and tell you, Morgan, I assume we are going to kind of nix the all SEC team preseason.
Yeah, let's pass on that.
All right.
Since we talked about the best players for each team, I think we'll be fine.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and just real quick about the West, I'm going Alabama, Auburn 2, Texas A&M 3. I'm going number 4, LSU, number 5, Ole Miss, number 6, Mississippi State, and number 7, the lowly Arkansas Razorbacks. Poor things.
Alabama faces off against Florida in this scenario. You got the two top teams there. What do you guys think? Houston, I'll start with you.
That's really hard to say. I'm going to end up taking Alabama on the night, and not by much. I think that Florida is close to reestablishing itself as a very dominant SEC power, but I'm not quite there yet. I think Najee Harris is the difference. I think having Jalen Waddle is a major difference, and I think Alabama has the better defense as well. So I take Alabama in that matchup.
Yeah, I totally agree with Houston. I think Alabama's the team to beat. As a matter of fact, Florida is getting back there, and it's about time. It took them forever. I didn't think it would take them this long, but it has. They got to find a quarterback, whether it's Kyle Trask or they have a freshman in Emory Jones, who's also a talent there as well. So, look, they got a lot of players there, and they're going to get better, and they're only getting better. But I just don't think they have what it takes to match with Alabama. I'd have Alabama by 10+.
So Alabama makes it back. Florida almost there. Looks like I'm hearing Texas A&M and Tennessee coming up as well. And our other school in the state, not so much, but always next year, right? Thanks for watching this video, and make sure to join our live show every Monday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time right here on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss it.